Hello and welcome to episode 7 of the Early Childhood Commission Child Rights Series 2025. Hear the voices of our children, we have rights too. I'm your host, Winsome Sharia Witter, and in this episode, we're tackling a deeply important topic, child trafficking. Be informed. This isn't just an issue for law enforcement or policymakers, it's a community issue. So every parent, teacher, community leader, and young person must take an active role in protecting our children. And we're honored to be joined by 3 impactful voices who work on the front lines of child protection in Jamaica. And we speak of none other than our very own Diahann Gordon-Harrison, children advocate for Jamaica. Welcome, Lady Harrison.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
Pleasure. And we have returning Dr. Warren A. Thompson, our director at the Child Protection and Family Services Agency. Welcome back, Doc.
Good evening. Thank you. Thank you to be back with you. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be back with you.
Awesome. All right. And we have joining us as well, Detective Sergeant Kevin Strong from the JCF will be with us in a moment. So we have quite a bit to go through. And as is customary, we are going to start by laying the foundation because the purpose here is for us to get informed, stay alert, and most importantly, to commit to action together. So it's not just Doc or Lady Gordon-Harrison, because we hear her preaching day in and day out as she seeks to protect the rights of our children, but we too can play an active role in that, and that is our ultimate objective here this evening. So let's begin by grounding ourselves in what child trafficking really is and what it looks like right here in Jamaica and the region. So what is child trafficking and what are the main types? We're going to start with Mrs. Gordon-Harrison.
All right. So first of all, thank you so much for having me again, and good evening to all the listeners and viewers who have joined us this evening. All right. So child trafficking is simply human trafficking of someone who is below the age of 18, because in Jamaica, and in fact in many countries across the world, we define a child as being anyone under 18 years. Now, to be very specific, the legislation, which is our human trafficking legislation, says that child trafficking is the act of recruiting a child, transporting a child, transferring a child, or harboring a child for the purpose of exploiting that child. Now, very importantly, is that when we talk about general human trafficking, we always say that 3 elements must be present. And those are the act, the means, and the purpose. So what is the act? Did a child get recruited somewhere for the purpose of exploiting him or her? Or were they transported from St. Mary to Kingston? So that's the act. The purpose, of course, is to exploit them, perhaps to use them for sexual favors and to collect money when these sexual favors are performed, or to use them to get cheap labor in very unsavory conditions, which is known as forced labor. So that is the purpose. But in human trafficking, when we talk about child trafficking, the means by which the child is entrapped is immaterial. And so sometimes we hear, for example, about false job ads, where people are lured towards these glorious job opportunities that seem to offer them the world. When we're dealing with children, we don't have to establish what means were used to entrap the child. And that's because a child cannot consent to their own exploitation. A point I want to make very quickly as well is that for trafficking to occur, movement doesn't have to happen. And so many times I say that the use of the word trafficking is a misnomer, because when you think trafficking, you think movement. Right. But a child can be exploited right in their very place of residence. They don't have to be moved to another location. So trafficking is really the exploitation of a child for the benefit of another person. You had asked about the types of trafficking that we have as well, so I'll answer that very quickly. Within the Jamaican context and globally, trafficking is known as forced labor, sexual exploitation, there is debt bondage, domestic servitude, organ harvesting, forced marriage, which we don't have so much in Jamaica, and also you have forced criminality, which our law doesn't recognize yet. And I say yet because I believe in, advocating for these things to be included. But if you look at all of these types, it's really saying that children can be entrapped in these schemes and someone else is collecting the money. So she's a prostitute, but is she really? Because she's engaged in sexual favors, but when the money is exchanged by the customer, it's not going to that child. It's going to someone who has coerced her into this particular life. And I leave it there at this time. Thank you.
Wow. Quite an eye-opener there. And I'm sure that's what Karine is referring to in terms of the child not being moved to be trafficked. You're right about that. Because normally we think about trafficking, we think movement. That's the first thing that comes to mind. So thank you for clarifying that. That's very important. And outside of those that you mentioned that are not prominent in Jamaica, the others, all of the others are present here?
Absolutely. The main forms of child trafficking that we have based on the cases and the situations reported are the sexual exploitation of teenage girls. And we also have a number of forced labor cases where we have, children being exploited for their labor in different circumstances, including domestic servitude. Those are the two big ticket items in Jamaica.
Right.
Wow. Let's bring in Detective Sergeant Kevin Strawn. Pull the screen a little towards you, Detective, so that we can see your face clearly. All right, a little more, put the top part, put it down towards you a little more. Fantastic, so we can see that lovely JCF logo. All right, let's bring you in the conversation. When we're thinking about the current statistics, what's that saying in terms of the scale and scope of child trafficking from the JCF perspective?
All right, first let me say good night to Mrs. Gordon-Harrison, Mr. Warren Thompson, and to you, Ms. Witter. It's a pleasure to be here tonight. Yes, it's a pleasure. And I must say, I like how Ms. Harrison have laid the foundation to let us understand what is child trafficking. And you said to the scope, the question was again?
So we're looking at the current statistics. What's that saying about the scale and scope of child trafficking in Jamaica?
Well, for us, we have actually received a couple of reports, but of child trafficking. However, when we do our investigations, we would have seen where some of them does not meet the offense, right? It would have been other offenses detected, right? So I will actually say for the year, we'll have about roughly four per year over the last probably 10 years. Cases as it relates to child trafficking. On average, that is.
You're referring to confirmed cases, Detective Strawn?
Yes, confirmed cases.
Right.
And we have some other investigations ongoing as it relates to that. Because, investigations do take time. Sometimes I always tell people that I would have sit and listen to the Americans, and they would have said a case would have taken them up to 3 years to investigate. So it's a time-consuming thing to get the facts out. So I will say the scope. Yes, the reports are there, But as I said before, the confirmed cases would have about 3 to 4 per year, average,
Okay.
over the
Doc,
last, say, 10 years.
okay. Doc, is there something you want to add to that in terms of from your office?
No.
Okay.
No.
All right. So let's move then to the most common methods used by traffickers to lure children, because we're hearing that it's not just about getting them outside the home, but inside. So what comes to mind readily is a conversation that we had in this space before about grooming. So talk to us about in terms of some of the most common methods that's been used, that's been confirmed from your end. Let's bring in Doc in the conversation, Dr. Thompson.
All right. Thank you again for having me, Mrs. Witter. I want to, Mrs. Gordon-Harrison, when she started, she talked about the movement not being required. And I think it's one of the myths around child trafficking persons in general, that we have to combat. So when we talk about children being lured, a lot of times we think about children who are entrapped. But in Jamaica, and Detective Strong can, clarify if this is so. But as far as I see, the majority of cases are children who are exploited by people they know, not necessarily by strangers who lure them and catfish them or use other means of recruiting them, but people who are connected to them in some way, a family friend, a family member, someone who their parents work with, whatever the case may be. But sexual grooming, and I use the term very carefully, we use it, to speak in general to any action that a person may engage in to try to get a child to engage in a sexual relationship with them. And I speak to grooming because I believe the majority of our cases involving children are actually sex trafficking cases. I don't know, Detective Strawn, if our sexual grooming legislation is very, very specific. You have to show that a person would have made an attempt or would have communicated with that child on at least 2 occasions, and then made an attempt to travel to meet with that child for the purpose of having sex, to prove that sexual grooming occurred. That's in law. But generally speaking, there are people who may give children gifts or give the parents gifts, treat them very nicely. And the aim of doing all of that is so that the child can eventually have a sexual relationship with them. We see that happening from time to time. We have seen cases with parents who have been complicit in their children's exploitation. They benefit, they get gifts, they get grocery, they get food, they get money, and encourage the children to engage in sexual relationships with others. So from where I sit, that is what I see, but I can't speak definitively to what the statistics say.
That's quite okay. We just want to make sure, because Detective Strawn said that they have a number of cases that they're investigating, and some of them do not fit into that mix of child trafficking. So we just want to get that clarity there. Which leads me to another area here. What are some of the common misconceptions about child trafficking? All right, I'm going back to Mrs. Gordon-Harrison. Some of the common misconceptions. You mentioned one earlier in terms of the movement. Any other?
Yes, of course, that child trafficking only happens to persons, or to children rather, who live in poor areas, poor communities, or rural areas. That's definitely a myth. Another one is that trafficking, when it comes down to children, is always about sexual exploitation. If you ask the man in the street to define what human trafficking or child trafficking is, they say, oh, it's when people having sex, man, and so on and so forth. So we're not paying attention to the other forms of exploitation that children can be exposed to. The other one is that only strangers are traffickers. Children can be trafficked by people who know them or family members. And so that's a myth. Another one has to do with this thing that if the child consents, it means that the child is precocious, and as we say in Jamaican parlance, very force-ripe. And so that can be trafficking because the child was up to it and the child was a bad picnic from a long time anyway, so it's not trafficking. And of course, tied to the movement issue is that it only happens across borders. So you can only be trafficked if you're moved from Jamaica to another country. So we're not even recognizing intra-parish and inter-parish trafficking of our people. The other thing as well that I would say is a big miss for Jamaica is that when we get persons to recognize that, yes, there's child trafficking and human trafficking here, sometimes they automatically think of Jamaica as what we call a source country, that people are taken from Jamaica, snuck out, and exploited elsewhere. But we're not thinking that Jamaica also serves as a destination country for traffickers. And what that means is that persons in Jamaica traffic children into the island and exploit them here. So we always think about trafficking from, I think, the Jamaican being the victim. And so our Jamaican people are disappearing and so on. So they're being trafficked, but we're not looking for local scenarios where children who are living in communities and in our midst could be victims of trafficking who have been brought from overseas and are being exploited here. So those are some of the big ticket myths, I think, that could be raised. Perhaps another one I'd like to mention, and this ties in with something that I'm pushing very heavily for, and that is forced criminality, is that sometimes we are bound by the confines of what exists. And what do I mean by that? Sometimes we don't look at a situation for what it is and do the analysis. So because if we go back to the definition of what child trafficking it is that it is where a child is exploited for the benefit of another, whether that is financial benefit or some other advantage, like status or whatever, that's what it is. So when you think, for example, of what is recognized in other jurisdictions as forced criminality, we have it here, but we're not recognizing it. Because when you have a youngster who lives in a particular city, who is targeted as the one who will always be asked to transport the gun in his knapsack, and he doesn't want to do it, he's not getting any benefit. But the gangsters are getting the benefit because the weapon has been transported from point A to point B. That's forced criminality. When a child is used as the lookout person because a robbery is going to be committed, or as the one who has to force through the burglar bars because they're the smallest and they're petrified, but they're told if they don't do it, there will be consequences. That's forced criminality. So I think the myth that I'm getting at is that sometimes because of a lack of analysis, we miss it, even though it's staring us in the face. And there are other such situations I could think of. For example, that case we had some time ago where women were seen to have rented babies from a family in St. Catherine and returned with those babies to St. Anne, where they had the babies out in the sun for the entire day at an ATM, using the baby as a prop to get persons coming from the ATM to give them money. That is an instance of a child being exposed, being exploited, getting no benefit at all, and the benefit is going to another. So those are just some of the myths that I'd like to put on the table.
If I may jump in, Mrs. Witter.
Sure.
One myth I'd like to add is this idea that trafficking always involves abduction. That the person is abducted.
Yes.
But as you heard, a child can remain in his or her own home and be a victim of trafficking. And I want to add another scenario, like forced begging. children who are forced to go on the streets and beg, and we see them begging, and we think they're just, rude children who don't want to go to school or don't want to go home, but someone forces them to beg, and they perhaps have a quota that they have to meet. They have to bring in a certain amount of money. It doesn't benefit them, but it benefits the person who is perhaps watching, waiting for them to get the funds and take it to them. That would be another form of trafficking.
Okay. Detective Strawn, you had something to add?
Yes. I just want to add, because I thought Ms. Gordon would have touched it. Where it's concerned with the law gives a child to give consent to have sex at the age of 16. So many people are misinformed, or they have a misinterpretation of the law when it says a child can have sex at age 16. So if the child is out there prostituting or involved in the commercial trade, they'll say then the law gives the permission for them to have it. But yes, the law gives permission for a child to have sex at age 16, but it does not give them the right to involve in any form of exploitation of that child. And also you will find that the employers, persons who operate bars, the clubs, you will find that they want to employ a 17-year-old. And the law clearly states that you cannot employ a child that in a nightclub or in any form that will put the child expose the child to danger. So that is one of the major things whenever I go to schools and communities to have a talk with them. You will always hear them say then, but the law say you can give consent at age 6. So many persons misunderstand that. Whilst the law said, yes, the child can have sex with a boyfriend, same age or whatsoever, it does not give them the right to be exploit them in that form, in having sex or working in these nightclubs. So that is one part.
Very important one there.
Right. And I also want to touch that we said that trafficking person, one of the trend we realize now is that parent will take nude pictures, or guardian nude pictures, or friend nude pictures of that child and sell them. Now that is a form of trafficking. Once you take nude pictures of these child and you sell these and benefit from them, that is exploiting the child. You can, if you're found in possession of these videos or pictures, then both you can be charged under child pornography, under the Pornography Act, and also human trafficking. So those are also other forms, as we are saying, that it don't have to be out of the home. It can happen same place in the home. All right. So
solid foundation you laid there. So now that we have a better understanding, because there are so many things that were new to me, Karine mentioned in terms of the movement that's new to us. So it's great that we're having this conversation. All right, so let's explore now why these things happen. Does poverty, lack of education, and societal factors have any contributing factor to the vulnerability of these children? Going back to Lady Harrison.
Yes, absolutely. So there are definitely push and pull factors into child trafficking. It doesn't mean that if these factors exist, however, that child trafficking must occur. But what we're saying is that it increases the vulnerability of the children who are in these circumstances. So, for example, extreme poverty, where the bare necessities are not being met within the home environment, and there is an absence of support and a sense of hopelessness as to how we're going to get these things. Imagine a day-to-day existence where everything is so sparse, and then something else, an alternative, is put on the table that seems to suggest that these needs can now be met. That's definitely a pull factor into human trafficking. Another situation that presents itself is if there is a very weak family structure. So forget the trappings of wealth and the physical acquisitions and so on, but just the absence of a strong bond within the home, within the family. If the child doesn't feel properly connected to someone in that space, then it makes it very easy for the child to be lured away with the hope that they can get affection in another set of circumstances. So the absence of that strong, grounded family nurturing and bonding is something that exposes children to very great risk. Also, if there are limited alternatives in terms of occupation, you want to do sports, you want to do different sorts of extracurricular, you want to have access to things, and it seems that it's not coming as fast as it should, this can also, lure a child into trafficking. What's equally significant as well is that if the child lives in a space where there is abuse or some kind of maltreatment, and the child wants to escape that daily abuse and maltreatment, there is, again, less connection with home and a greater willingness to move to another set of circumstances. If the child as well is exposed to poor guidance, in terms of moral guidance and, spiritual grounding and all of that, then again, that sometimes can affect the child's ability to discern right from wrong, appropriate from inappropriate, the benefit of going through a process, because life isn't easy. But sometimes when, the socialization is of such that things need to happen now at all costs, you need to do this, and the moral code and fiber isn't as strong as it should be, then a child may say, well, why not? So what if I'm going to be exposed, to having sex with multiple partners? Maybe that will be more exciting than the boring life that I lead. And that can happen in terms of the child's reasoning when the moral compass is broken. And so these are some of the factors which are linked, yes, to socioeconomic issues, but also to grounding issues within the family unit that can make a child predisposed to becoming a victim.
Wow. And we can see where the internet and social media can actually make this situation even more challenging. What specific instances can you mention in terms of how internet, social media has facilitated trafficking based on the cases that you're seeing, Detective Strawn?
Well, we would have an international case where the trafficker met the child on Facebook, right? It is a way that traffickers reach out to their victims, whether on WhatsApp or any other social platform. This is very impactful even since COVID. We've seen where more and more the reaching of their victims are done by the internet. And as I speak to the international case, it was on Facebook that the trafficker met her from. She was from Guyana, and she communicated with the trafficker. Trafficker somewhat communicate with also the parent, and somehow convince the parent that she was taking the child here to actually give her a vacation, because the child have never left her space before. And so they come to an agreement and actually end up. So yes, it is a major impact in recruitment of our children, and what I see is that more and more that peer pressure also leads these children to actually try and get a device so that they can always be on it. And if they are not on the device, they will borrow a friend device. If the parent too strict, they will borrow a friend device just to be on the internet or and trying to surf the internet. We have somewhere they call the dark web. Many of our children are being found locked into those areas. And as I said before, that mothers will send nude pictures of their, or parents will send nude pictures of their children to other persons. You know, we have a case where the parent was actually exposing the child to a person who said that they were of a young age, right? And when it was born out, this man was in his 60s. But what he did is that he put up fake pictures of himself. So it's one of the platforms that they are really using to get to our children.
Right. And with all of that, it's really very interesting. I'm Cheryl is saying here, but all of this leaves long-lasting impact on the child, emotional, physical, and otherwise. So let's bring in Dr. Thompson in the discussion now. What are some of the short-term and long-term effects on the child's mental, emotional, and physical well-being?
Right. So how they respond? Trafficking, of course, is harmful to the child. And before I respond, I want to say that very often a child may be going through an experience. They can't say that it is trafficking, you know, but they know that something is being done to them. So it looks like physical abuse. It looks like sexual abuse. It looks like somebody is restricting them, forcing the child to do something. But the impact is, as you mentioned, both physical, emotional. We see children who whose education has been disrupted because of their trafficking experience. So they are denied opportunities to go to school. That's one. There are children who, even if they do go to school, they can't focus in school because, as one victim said to me, when she sits in the classroom, all of what she went through just keeps coming back. So, and that's because the trauma has not been resolved. We've seen instances with children who, although the child may now be a teenager, they're when they do a psychoeducational assessment, for example, they are operating at the level of perhaps an 8 or 9-year-old. I remember one particular case, when I checked it, that's when the exploitation actually began, when she was about around 8 or 9, right? So there is the educational impact. Of course, when we talk about the psychological and emotional impact, we're talking about children who are unable to form healthy relationships because the person who they perhaps trusted would have caused them to become victimized in the way they were. Children who have, attachment issues, right? So, as I said, they're unable to form relationships. Or children who, I don't want to get too technical now, but when you look at trauma, the impact of trauma, there are two particular disorders that a child victim can develop. So reactive attachment disorder, for one, the child has a challenge or difficulty forming attachments. And then there is disinhibited social engagement disorder, he said. And that's a child who is not able to discern right from wrong, as it were. So the child, is very open, forms relationships with anybody. If somebody says, hey, let's go do so and so, the child will be, willingly go and do it without thinking that this may be dangerous or this person may not mean me well. So it's a child who is not able to regulate in that way. And then, of course, other impacts of trauma, emotional regulation. The child is not able to regulate his or her emotions. So you're looking at behavioral manifestations, outbursts, children who, they get in fights, when they feel those big emotions, they feel upset or they feel sad, it manifests physically. So they hurt others. They shout, they tell their caregivers anything that comes to their minds. So those are some of the ways in which we see trauma from trafficking impacting children.
Thank you so much, Doc. All right. This one, is there evidence that victims may become perpetrators themselves? Any such evidence?
I want to say, and I think I shared it the last time I came here. I think, speaking to Jamaican context, we have some cultural practices, perhaps, that lend themselves to the exploitation of people. And I think some Jamaicans, when a person is exploited, it's probably seen as normal. So a person may, if you were exploited, then it's natural that you follow and you exploit others too, right? But we have seen it where victims of trafficking, both adults and children, in fact, very often turn around to become themselves perpetrators. Some of them, if there's a trafficking network, for example, they become a part of that network, perhaps become recruiters, perhaps become, whatever their role may be, but they become a part of the network. And then again, that looks too like forced criminality, because some of them don't even recognize that, what I'm doing is because of the ways in which I've been hurt before, or what I'm doing is not right. Some children, especially, if that's what they grow up and see, they become a part of that.
Okay. Detective Strawn, you were nodding earlier.
Yes. Yes, I was saying they develop a Stockholm syndrome. They believe that their trafficker is good to them. They see them as loving, so they continue, they do what they say.
Right.
So they develop a Stockholm syndrome.
Yeah, the trauma bonding. Yeah, the trauma bonding.
If I could jump in as well with an actual example without being too specific, certainly within the context of sexual exploitation, it is quite normal within the human trafficking world that when you have a female who was, one of the girls that was being pimped out, when she gets to a certain level of being a senior victim, so to speak, sometimes because of the trauma bonding and the Stockholm syndrome and all of that, there is a view that she's now in love with her trafficker. And then he, because she's so loyal, then turns her into, I'm not sure I can say this word in this forum, but she becomes a quote unquote supervisor, and that's not the name they use within the trafficking world.
Right.
And she now helps to lure other females who are unsuspecting to be a part of the girls who are the syndicate of girls who are now being pimped. And so she becomes the deputy, as it were, to the John, which is the name that is used for usually a man who is controlling the sex organization.
Yeah.
And so she now is going to be the one that is co-exploiting these new recruits by assisting with luring them into the syndicate in the first place and helping to hold the line to ensure that they do exactly what they're told. And psychologically, a part of the thinking is that this is her revenge, so to speak, putting somebody through what she has been through. But it also is a very peculiar power dynamic where she is exerting her authority and almost demanding respect. Notice I didn't say commanding it. And, being that report up to show the John that, look, I'm a good girl because I'm helping you reign in the profit. And so in those instances, sometimes you have some of the proceeds, certainly not the majority of it, being shared as an incentive to this female now who has risen through the ranks and has now become a co-trafficker herself.
Wow.
But even beyond
before you go, Doc, there's a great point to take Cheryl's question. Are there cases where children have been trafficked out of Jamaica and later had the opportunity to return?
I'm not aware of any case where a child was trafficked out of Jamaica. I don't know the case. I'm not saying it has never happened. I'm not aware.
Well, I don't know if Detective Strawn wants to tell tales out of school. I mean, I certainly know of a few instances where that has been suspected, but in terms of them returning to the country, I'm not aware of that. But I do know of instances where Jamaican children have been trafficked out, which is why Jamaica is classified as a source country as well for human trafficking.
All right. The issue we have with that is that because the recruitment was done here and not the exploitation. The fact that the exploitation was done in the other country I know a particular case where it had happened in a Caribbean country, but the evidence gathered in that country was limited, right? So we could not proceed, but it was highly suspected that I can say about 4 to 5 cases, right, of children being suspected. I use the word suspected because I don't have the evidence for that country, right? But it was suspected that they were actually trafficked, exploited in the other country. But the evidence, they have returned. Yes, some of them have returned, but the evidence to put the evidence together, that is a challenge.
All right, this is a good point for us to examine what protections are currently in place and where we still need to strengthen policies for enforcement and all of that. So what are the key national and international laws protecting children in the context that you're sharing now based on jurisdiction? Lady Harrison?
Right. So I mean, so the Palermo Protocol is where this kind of all began, and that is the international treaty that first of all recognizes the exploitation of people as not only a criminal matter but a human rights violation. And this speaks about this is where the terminology comes up about, you know, trafficking in persons, human trafficking. Some people are still saying modern day slavery and so on. And this particular protocol says globally that these things are intolerable and that in treating with the criminal aspect of human trafficking, it should not be missed that it's also a violation of people's human rights. Because if you think back on what we've been talking about, it really is dehumanizing to exploit someone and they don't even get any of the benefits, you know, to put it in very basic terms. And so that is something that is nicely framed in the protocol that a lot of the countries globally who have committed to the anti-human trafficking work are using as the basis to guide their own local legislation, national action plans, and policies. Outside of that broad international protocol, within the Jamaican context, we have our Trafficking in Persons Prevention, Suppression, and Punishment Act, which is the legislation that first of all recognizes that the act of human trafficking and exploiting of people is something that can be prosecuted within Jamaica. And there are very clear penalties and different types of offenses that that legislation creates. And it gives the courts certain powers in terms of sentencing, seeking restitution for victims, for example. And it really is one of the very rare criminal, piece of criminal legislation that goes into an accused person upon conviction being told that not only will you have to serve time if you're convicted, but you'll have to dig into your pocket to pay the victim money because of the turmoil that you've caused in that person's life. We also have, certainly in terms of what I would call supporting pieces of legislation that seek to protect children from being trafficked, the Child Care and Protection Act, it has a pronouncement, if you will, that the act of child trafficking is not to be tolerated. and it is to be prosecuted within the confines of the Trafficking in Persons legislation. We also have the Sexual Offences Act. Earlier we were talking about, for example, sexual grooming, which has a particular fixed definition within that piece of legislation. But it's very important to recognize it, because sometimes traffickers take their time to build a relationship
Right.
with their unsuspecting victim, and then that grooming process now can launch into the trafficking experience, because you have had sufficient time to prepare your victim to receive the exploitation. And similarly, another supporting piece of legislation is the Child Pornography Prevention Act, which speaks about, as the name suggests, children being portrayed in sexual images.
Right.
And so if you're encouraging a child, for example, to take an inappropriate sexual image and then share it with you for whatever purpose, then sometimes that is a part of the preparation again of the child to have these kinds of conversations, so that by the time you get way down the wicket and you're ready to do the exploitation, the child would have been so sensitized that it would be an easier feat for you to turn that child into your prey. So those are some of the, I would say, national largely and international framework in terms of how children are, there's an attempt to protect children from trafficking.
There's so many different, and I know that over the years there have been a lot of improvement in terms of policies and enforcement. But can these be further strengthened to better protect our children? From where you sit, Mrs. Harrison.
There's always room for improvement, and I think Jamaica can feel particularly proud, not satisfied, not complacent, but proud, because we have made a lot of strides. Our legislation came about in 2005, thereabout, and it's been 20 years of growth and continued tweaking. We've had, for example, several amendments to the Trafficking in Persons Act. As the dialogue, I think, has evolved, and as the recognition has hit certain quotas. For example, when we first started talking about prosecuting human trafficking cases, it was always with a judge and a jury. Fast forward now to an amendment that says it can be a judge alone trial. And my own view is that some of the things that fed into this decision had to do with the psychological toll that a lengthy trial can have on a victim. It can dissuade the victim from coming forward, and it can compound the victim's psychological issues and emotional baggage. And also sometimes, because of the psychology that is involved in prosecuting a human trafficking case, sometimes if the jury, which is typically made up of lay persons, can't understand, then how she could sit there for the whole time and let something like that happen. It can lead to perhaps the evidence not being as fully appreciated as it should, and we've had increases as well in terms of the penalty. We have had a recognition that, human trafficking should be on, a good footing, as, when I talk about a good footing, I mean in terms of the severity of the punishment. We have had increases in terms of what I would style the efficiency of how trafficking cases are dealt with, because at one time you would have to have the conviction, and then you have to have a separate hearing now for the restitution and so on to the victim. And so we have made very great strides, but there is room to always improve, because human trafficking is a dynamic crime. It's a dynamic situation because it manifests in so many different ways. And so you have to keep retooling and retweaking to ensure that complacency doesn't set in. And then the traffickers are all the way up here and the responses are down here.
Well said. And this is the point now where this resource connector really chips in terms of letting the community know how they can be a part of what's happening. We have the interagency approach, which is demonstrated here. We have our children advocate, we have the Child Protection and Family Services Agency, and of course, the JCF represented here. Just 3 of the many agencies that work together to tackle these. But let's hear now, how can early childhood educators and caregivers help prevent trafficking? We're going to start with you, Dr. Thompson.
Well, first of all, we need every Jamaican to take a stand against the exploitation of others, right? By taking a stand, it means paying attention to when a child is in a situation where he or she is being abused or ill-treated, or where it's obvious that the child is not able to live a free and comfortable and leisurely life that children should have, where they can play and go to school and so on. So we need every single Jamaican to pay attention to those things. And where you see that a child might need some support, do not be afraid to make a report. And reporting is easy. It's as simple as calling 211. And Detective Strong can tell you, once a report is made to 211 and it looks like trafficking, it may not be quite trafficking, but it looks like trafficking, is going to be referred for his team to investigate. So that is one simple way that Jamaicans can become involved. And of course, in your group, your churches, your community groups, these kinds of conversations are also important to get the community aware of what human trafficking is, what child trafficking is, and what we can do to better protect our children. I'll stop there.
Fantastic. All right, let's turn our focus to partnership, Detective Strong. What role do partnerships between the early childhood sector, law enforcement, and social services play in prevention and response?
Well, to get the message across to our young children as early as possible, that is a major way. You said early childhood, so I'm thinking of once they hit basic school.
That's
so when the NATFATIP, the National Task Force Against Trafficking in Person, that's the board that oversees what Jamaica does as it relates to trafficking in person, combating trafficking in person. They would have made some books like that little children, comic books, so they can share the information and be shared to them, because it is depicting the age groups. So in that way, we could get the message early out to them. So with the early childhood commission, I think that being part of it, because there we have the 3 subcommittees on that task force that deal with prevention, prosecution, and
protection.
Protection, right? So once being a part of that, I think to be for the early ECC to be a member of the prevention committee. That is my suggestion. Could be a member of that, so we can get the message early across to our children, bringing them on, getting part of it, because this was implemented some time ago. I don't know. I've not seen it being active enough now. The curriculum in school, Teachfield was one of the first school who did a project as it relates to human trafficking. So getting the children understanding more about human trafficking. I think some planning also was in having a debate on the subjects, understanding schools and all of that. And if we can get that across to our children, then we think the knowledge will share, having some prizes for these debates and stuff like that. Let them something similar to school challenge quiz in that form. I think that we can help prevent, not stop, but help prevent this crime. So I think that reaching out and being a part, as I said, of the task force and are being in partnership with the task force, then I think that would be a great start.
Okay, fantastic. The team is listening, so I'm sure they will act on that. Right. So a lot has been going on in terms of public education efforts. But what's needed? Mrs. Gordon-Harrison, what else do we need to do? We have this forum that we are being a part of the education process, and I know you have been doing quite a bit over the years. The JCF does their part, CPFSA. What else can we do?
Well, I think we just need to keep going and re-looking at our efforts to ensure that they remain relevant and that they're reaching stakeholders right across Jamaica. Certainly, the Office of the National Rapporteur on Trafficking in Persons, which I also head as the National Rapporteur, has been looking through introspective lens at how we get the message out. And so we have retweaked a little bit and have put what I think could be described as some additional tools in the pan that should help to build the effort in relation to educating the public. And some of those tools I'll mention very quickly. I'm not sure if persons know that we have an online resource library, which is free to access and is full of information from right across the world, right across the Caribbean region, and of course within the Jamaican context, that tells people just everything that they need to know about human trafficking. And so we invite persons to participate in the learning process by visiting that online resource library so that you can use the material that is on there to help boost in your own public education initiatives within your various institutions. We also have recently launched our Heightening Awareness to Combat Human Trafficking course. Again, it's on our website, onrtip.gov.jm. It's free to do, and it gives you narratives and beautiful stories from the Jamaican culture that illustrate how human trafficking can unfold right before your very eyes. And it also equips the person who is doing the course with what to do if they see these circumstances. And at the end of it, there is certification for the user. There is also a monthly bulletin that the ONRTIP issues, again, looking at different pieces of the human trafficking puzzle within Jamaica and building capacity. And of course, we also use social media across various platforms to use digital promotion to educate about what human trafficking is. So what I'm inviting persons to do in short is to follow the ONRTIP, use our material, and help it to amplify the critical information that's being disseminated and to build your own public education initiatives as you go through the paces of educating those stakeholders that you interact with on a regular basis.
Fantastic resource. Not to worry if you did not get it, just ensure you subscribe to the Serenity Resource Connector website. The blog recap will be there with the link shared so you can navigate to get the additional information. We cannot close without talking about the healing process because the victims need support. So how do we help them to rebuild and with dignity and hope? What agencies and programs support survivors in their recovery and reintegration? Go ahead.
Is that for me?
Sir Thompson.
Okay. All right.
You're ready with the response.
So we look at reintegration into the community. You can appreciate that a victim of trafficking would have experienced some kind of isolation. So the focus is to help that child to get to live as normal a life as possible. So the process of healing may include therapy, right? It may include therapy. It may include providing the victim with additional support. So, for example, the learning that has been lost, getting additional support for the child to kind of catch up in that area. If there is need to access other resources like the social protection services, whether it's a PATH program or any other kind of service that's available, then those kinds of connections are provided. Of course, from the CPFSA, if the child is removed from the home, then we provide general case management, and we provide, of course, support in all those areas to ensure that the child gets the resources and support needed to live a normal life as possible. And of course, the end game is to have the child reintegrated back into their own families, if that is possible, or in another kind of family environment. Of course, reintegrate into the school system. And if housing is a challenge, get and try to provide them access to housing if we're able to do so. The aim is reintegration.
Mm-hmm. Can I just add two very quick additions to
Sure.
Warren's input? So there is also available a survivor's handbook, literally a roadmap that tells persons who have been or suspect that they have been victims of trafficking, how to get back on your feet. What are some of the things that you are entitled to, so it doesn't feel as if you're begging if you ask for the support, and just that empowerment and reassurance that they need to feel validated and to feel as if, this is a right. And then, of course, the mental health support that it has to be ongoing, not just when the trafficking situation ends or 2 months thereafter, but for as long as the need is there. That mental health support is there. I know that the Ministry of Health and Wellness has some helplines that they use to provide the support. Let's say the child comes out of the trafficking experience close to the age of majority. And then, of course, the Office of the Children's Advocate operates Safe Spot, which is a 24-hour child and teen helpline that takes care of providing free psychological counseling support that is confidential 24 hours a day, through qualified counselors and psychologists who are immediately connected to any child who reaches out for that mental support, without any wait time. So that's a crucial element in supporting children recover from, the traumatic experience that human trafficking is.
Right. Just to add to the mental health support, we work closely with the Victim Services Division as well.
Yes.
So for child victims, if the child is at home with their families, then the Victim Services Division provides the mental health support. If the child has been removed and is in the care of the state, then the CPFSA ensures that the mental health support is provided. And as Mrs. Harrison said, that the support is not a one-off support. You'll appreciate that a victim may take years to go through that process of psycho-emotional healing.
Fantastic. Anything to add, Detective Strong?
Well, I was going where Dr. Thompson finished with Victim Services Division, because whenever we rescue a victim, we always ensure that they are medically examined and they also go through the counseling process. So I was going right there where it ended.
I know you want to wrap up, Mrs. Witter, but I have to put it out there. You'd have heard that this year is 20 years since we've had trafficking in persons legislation passed, and it's 20 years, I believe, since we've had the National Task Force Against Trafficking in Persons. And the last week of July is also observed as Trafficking in Persons Week. And the 30th of July is World Day Against Trafficking in Persons. And because it's our 20th anniversary, we have a number of things that we are planning. I don't want to tell you too much at this point, but we're trying to do, to really get the community to be aware that this is still something that they should be looking out for. It is still on the agenda, and we need all Jamaicans to help us to take a stand, not only against child trafficking, but trafficking in persons in general.
Fantastic. So we are going to stay tuned to the various social media platforms so we can see those plans unveiled, so we can know how we can be a part of the process. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. This conversation was quite powerful and in some ways painful, but very necessary. As we heard from our guests, child trafficking is real, it is here among us, and it's preventable. So, what can you do? What can I do? What can we do? Learn the signs, speak up if something feels wrong, support the agencies doing the work, and keep the conversation going in your schools, churches, and WhatsApp groups. And Detective Strong made a very valid point there. We need to get the children to be a part of the conversation as well, because they will understand, put it in a way that they can understand and be a part of that change. We have the Jamaica Library Service that does a number of these different engagements as it relates to essay competitions and all these different entities. So this might be another avenue to collaborate to make sure that that's a part of that space. So we have all hands on deck. So on behalf of Serenity Resource Connector and the Early Childhood Commission family and our amazing guests who shared some quite eye-opening realities that's happening here among us that we are sometimes oblivious to. Thank you so much for tuning in. And remember, do not keep the information to yourself. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Even after we've left here, share the forum replay with your community and share your thoughts so others can be a part of the conversation and learn how they too can be a part of the change that we all want to see in our spaces. So go ahead and subscribe if you have not yet subscribed, and stay connected for our community-driven conversations each Thursday and second and third Tuesday in this space. Together we can protect our children. Together we can end child trafficking. But it takes each of us working together to make it happen. Thank you again, and have yourselves a fantastic rest of the night.
Thank you.
Take care. Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Absolute pleasure.
Okay. Night, gentlemen. Take care.
A Child Rights Series 2025 Live Forum, Hear the Voices of Our Children, We Have Rights Too, is brought to you on third Tuesdays at 8 p.m. in collaboration with the Early Childhood Commission. Visit our website at www.serenityresourceconnector.com and subscribe to receive our weekly blog post. Join us again on Thursday at 8 p.m. for Community Corner. Thank you for watching.